Okay, hi, welcome everyone. My name is Carol Glasser, and I help along with Gayla and Lisa to organize the Animals and Society Colloquium Series. I am a member of the Animals and Society section of the American Sociological Association, and I work on this with the Animals and Society Institute. I'd like to hand it over to Gayla for a moment to introduce herself and tell you a little bit about ASI.
Yes, hi and welcome. So I'm the Human Animal Studies Program Director at the Animals and Society Institute, who happily partners with Carol on these colloquia. Just a little bit about ASI and what we offer that might be of interest. We promote research into human animal studies relationships through two academic journals that we manage, and the Society in Animals and the Journal of Applied Animal Welfare Science, and we have an HAS book series as well. We also provide resources for scholars, faculty, mental health professionals, and students, including what we're really proud of. We've got a database of listings for degrees and programs that we've just reworked, and that's coming out new this month. I also produce a monthly listserv human animal studies report that covers news, funding opportunities, new articles, new books, calls for papers and conferences and journals. And I will put the links in the chat for everybody to those things. And I'm very excited to hear Tiamat's presentation today. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you so much. So now let's get to the reason that all of us are here, and that is to hear Tiamat Warda give a presentation on the role of emotional labor in humane interspecies work. Before we begin, I would like it if we could all give a round of applause to Tiamat, who is now officially Dr. Warda. So Tiamat has successfully defended her PhD in anthrozoology at the University of Exeter. Her work is in defining humane interspecies emotional labor, with 1 foot in the industry, working with the assistance dog sector, and 1 foot in academia. Her research interests can be found at the intersection of animal labor and emotional management. So with that, I will hand this over to Dr. Warda for our presentation today. Oh, right before I do that, I'm so sorry. I forgot to make the announcement that the way that we do these talks is that our speaker will present, and then we will have a Q&A session. I will be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions you want to put into the chat, you can type them in there. And about halfway through, we'll go into a Q&A, and you can talk at that time and raise your hand and ask questions. All right, so with that, I will now officially hand it over.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's such a pleasure to be here to share a bit about my research, sort of an introduction to it of sorts. Thank you so much, Carol, for that, and Gayla and Lisa for inviting and kind of organizing everything so well. It's been really nice. I just want to quickly address those of you who are not interested in assistance dogs at all. I do still think that this will be relevant to your research, or maybe just your professional focus in some way. I do use guide dogs and the guide dog mobility instructors who educate them, who are also known as GDMIs, as case studies in this talk. But the topic, sort of the overall discussion, really stretches across all work that involves interpersonal exchanges, which is the majority of mandated work. So I will be doing my best to present and discuss this topic in a way that really expresses that as best as possible. So to offer some context beyond what Carol just shared, to sort of situate myself, I've been in the guide dog sector here in Europe in a professional capacity for about 12 years, 6 of which as a GDMI myself, running a guide dog school in Germany, and the remaining 6 I've been a consultant to schools and organization within the assistance dog sector, and an assistance dog team exam supervisor. And this picture here on the slide, just for anyone who like me is always curious about the pictures on slides, is me back when I was working as a GDMI very long ago with one of the sweetest guide dogs I have ever had the pleasure of working with. She's retired now, but she worked and lived really beautifully together with this client. And here she's showing this client a curb on a street so that he doesn't stumble over it. And yeah, they're just one of my favorite teams that I've instructed. So I decided that would be a nice little image to start this off with. So the work that guide dogs and their GDMIs do with and for each other, as well as for their clients, is really a feat of physical, but also incredible skill around emotional discipline. And despite my extensive experience with this line of work, I'm still just really amazed by it. And I laugh a lot with other GDMIs just thinking like, this shouldn't be possible. Like, how are we even able to teach a dog to guide a wholly or partially vision impaired individual through a city? It's such an amazing ability that these guide dogs have. I mean, guide dogs and GDMIs will confront and ideally learn from a really wide range of challenging and evolving interactions and dynamics and really stressful environments depending on where they predominantly work. And so entering academia after working as a GDMI, I began to notice this budding discourse around animal organization studies. There was quite a lot being published about assistance dogs, of course, as well as work done with predominantly on the management of emotions on behalf of humans, but also there was some on the individuals of other species managing their emotions within multi-species workplaces. But what I find was really absent was attention directed toward the toll that emotion management can have on workers and the significant amount of recognition and really education and proactive support that this professional skill asks of workers and employers alike. And specifically, I felt the need for research acknowledging the strategies that workers utilize to perform emotional labor, and also what factors can impact the sustainability and enjoyment of an emotional labor practice. And the second thing, just as a side note that I've noticed very quickly, was the general sort of lack in literature conducted and written by GDMIs themselves, who can bring in that insider knowledge and emotion to the work they carry out and the impact it can ultimately have then on their line of work that they can bring back to the sector. And as I have written here on the slide, we as human stakeholders need to care about and really take seriously the emotion management done by guide dogs, who are stakeholders themselves, to ensure that quality and hopefully improvement of their work lives going forward. But I also don't want to frame this in a negative light. Teaching guide dogs to manage their emotion displays can often be an enjoyable dynamic between GDMI and guide dogs. But there are times where this entangled effort to present, as well as learn and teach guide dogs to present and teach GDMIs to present the expected emotion displays can be detrimental on the individual. So the emotional well-being, as well as working success of guide dogs and GDMIs. Similar to other GDMIs, much of my own work in the field was involved with guiding my emotions in a direction that would allow me to best teach guide dogs to manage their own. So it's sort of this circular effort on both ends. So today I'll be discussing a concept that I've spoken about and published elsewhere. I've dropped just a few references on the side if you're interested, as well as that last one on Irish Guide Dogs for the Blind, who acted as a case study for this research. So emotional labor can be understood as a professional skill that is required to present the demeanors appropriate during working hours for your formal mandated job. So in other words, the skill and effort to act professionally, to put it simply. So for a guide dog, this would be when they are wearing their uniform, so their vest, their harness. And this will be especially the case when a human has the handle of the harness in their hand and the guide dog is actively guiding. That would be sort of the main time frame that we're looking at here. I'm especially interested in what can make an emotional labor practice as part of an individual's work life more or less humane. And I have done this by aligning with the concept of humane jobs, which you will be familiar with if you have read Kendra Coulter's work on this. So essentially, this framework acknowledges that the jobs we do, and sort of more broadly, the work lives we lead, move at times quite fluidly and seamlessly on this continuum. And this continuum has an extreme on either end. And if we want to go again with Coulter's terminology here for the sake of consistency, it would be suffering on one end and enjoyment on the other. So what I'll be discussing today looks at this continuum and considers how the ways in which we perform emotional labor can move an emotional labor episode along this continuum. So either closer or further away from an enjoyable, mutually beneficial, in other words, humane practice. And so I won't be going too much into sort of arguing in favor for individuals of other species performing emotional labor, managing their emotions as part of their mandated work, because this has definitely been done elsewhere. I have listed some references here on the slide. This is by no means exhaustive, but just to give you sort of an idea of a starting point regarding literature that looks at the emotion management of individuals of other species specifically. I'm also always a bit sad that I can't fully unpack absolutely everything about this research in talks like this. There will be a book coming out that unpacks the different phases of a guide dog's work life and how each of these can impact their emotional labor practice and working success, along with some articles. But today I will be mainly focusing on just sort of introducing this way of looking at professionalism of individuals of other species and viewing things through that lens, as well as, of course, sharing the terminology that goes along with that. This was a patchwork ethnography with GDMIs and guide dogs in Ireland, Irish Guide Dogs for the Blind, as well as my own autoethnographic data stemming from the 12 years in the guide dog sector, acting as case studies. Irish Guide Dogs for the Blind was so wonderful to work with because just their size, but also their openness toward my research really allowed me to interview a large number of employees and clients, but also professionals who have worked and continue to work together with them within the assistance dog sector. So I got a fairly holistic understanding of their emotional labor practice, and they were all just so generous with their time. So just to acknowledge that briefly before we move on. So this research has strongly, if not purely, been driven by the desire for meaningful impact. And the first step when it comes to this topic, in my opinion, is providing the more nuanced, specific terminology required to have these initial conversations about topics that have not received that much attention yet. So for example, some trainers might use the word obedience. Whether you agree with that word or not, it's another discussion, but just in terms of this discussion here. But we're not looking at or having the words to explain how a dog is being obedient and what internal strategies they are using to manage their emotions enough to be perceived as obedient by you in that specific context and dynamic. So without that understanding, we won't come much further. So how is this being done? Are they suppressing their emotion displays or redirecting their emotions? How were the expectations formed that they are working to align with? So I'm not speaking here directly of the emotions themselves, but the emotion displays, so the observable displays of emotion. And I make the specification here because they can differ from our emotions. So how we feel can either align with or contrast with what we present when we're acting professionally. And there are two core strategies that are most commonly used when performing and discussing emotional labor. Whichever one a worker chooses or is even able to perform at a given moment is what essentially dictates whether the emotional labor episode is humane or inhumane. And that is, put quite simply, the argument that I'm presenting here today. So the first and most ideal strategy is referred to as deep acting. And this is when you either induce a different, more appropriate emotion display, emotion than the one you feel or expect to feel, or you alter an existing emotion to create a more authentic professionalism. And this can be done actively or passively. So in other words, if you are utilizing passive deep acting on a certain day, you are just naturally feeling the way you're expected to act in the workplace. That is sort of what we would all strive for. To perform active deep acting, GDMIs or guide dogs would direct and shift attention toward alternative activities or thoughts to induce the required emotion to then express. And so this would be known as sort of attentional deployment. So think here of how you might empathize with someone to just conjure up that patience and friendliness required to behave professionally while you're helping them, despite how much they might be frustrating you in that moment. But also think of how you might be educating a dog to ignore distractions, remain calm and responsive in all scenarios and environments, and so on. You might redirect the dog's attention to you or toward a different activity or task to manage their emotion expression. And then through repetition over time, you're teaching them to not only manage their displays on the surface, but teaching them to deploy their attention on their own in the future as a form of deep acting. So another way to perform deep acting out of many potential approaches is to reappraise the situation to induce the required emotion. So that's referred to as more cognitive change. And deep acting really is predominantly concerned with cognitive change, sort of these internal shifts in perspective and intention, understanding something and being educated about it in a way that gives you the skills and mindset to approach it in a healthier, more genuine manner. Then there is surface acting. And this is where a worker, and again, in this case, that can be a GDMI or a guide dog, is presenting fake emotion displays or suppressing their true emotions in some way. So you could think of the common phrase you might hear, service with a smile. And that often refers to surface acting because it implies that you provide your service by pasting on that smile, no matter how you actually feel. And this is, of course, an example taken from a more anthropocentric context of humans presenting a pleasant demeanor for other humans, but it is applicable across individuals of other species with formal jobs as well. More research will need to be done, of course, on recognizing which strategy an assistance dog is utilizing in a given moment. But one example for surface acting would be an assistance dog who is suppressing their emotion displays. So you might think of an assistance dog who has been taught to sit and wait in a given situation, but is just sort of under the surface, hence the name, either nervous or otherwise aroused and excited or anxious. Or you might conjure up an image of an assistance dog who has learned to walk past another dog on a loose leash and calmly next to their human. But instead, they might be doing that, but their tail is still up, their eyes might be darting back and forth, their muscles are tense, and so on. There's a lot of research out there on identifying stress in canines, despite them doing what they're actually technically being told to do. So in the examples I just gave, technically the assistance dog is presenting the demeanor expected of them, and they're performing emotional labor to do so. Because if they weren't, they would simply be doing what they like and not behaving professionally. They would stand up from the seated position. They would attempt to run over and greet the other dog, but they aren't. They are in one way or another managing their displays to align with what is expected of them and what they've been taught. But despite technically doing that, their genuine emotions are not aligning with that display as they would if they were deep acting. And so there is this dissonance here between their demeanor and what they're presenting. And it's this dissonance that can be recognized by observing their behavior, as I mentioned. But also, what my conversations with veterinarians on this topic has revealed is, of course, it can be identified by certain physiological symptoms, such as certain skin conditions that result from sort of long-term stress, that classic constant chewing of the paws and so on. But also other signs of stress and anxiety, such as licking, tense muscles, shaking, panting, quicker footsteps, and so on, just to name a handful. So this area is really ripe for future research to unpack more the different ways that practitioners can identify a guide dog performing predominantly surface acting. And it's something that I go into much more detail in upcoming literature that I'll be sharing on that. So essentially, the strategies I mentioned here are internal strategies that an individual will use to perform emotional labor. So they are kind of the reins or the leads, I suppose, that steer the quality of your work life in regards to your emotional labor practice, closer or further away from being enjoyable and mutually beneficial on that continuum I showed earlier. And the practitioners I've spoken with about this have found the terms themselves to be quite intuitive. So surface acting referring to the purely external, the emotion displays just on the surface, and deep acting speaking to a deeper, more internal adjustment of emotion to be able to provide a professional service as expected by employers. And so research has found that some of which I listed here on the slide, that surface acting has much more serious consequences on your well-being. There are many discussions around how surface acting can correlate with detrimental experiences such as anxiety and burnout and a loss of interest in and enjoyment of a job. And it's also been linked to depersonalization, depletion of the worker's ego, definitely linked to inauthenticity. And it's been observed that when workers have depleted their inner resources or generally lack emotional intelligence, they're increasingly likely to perform surface acting, and they just won't have the energy or the reserves at some point to engage with deep acting. So it sort of becomes this downward spiral. So in other words, if we perform surface acting every now and then for a short period of time, this may not have a serious impact on our quality of worker well-being, and it's kind of a given that will come up every now and then. But if it is being asked of us, or of a guide dog in this case, for a number of reasons, for extended periods of time and really consistently, this can lead to depleted resources to manage anything more than surface acting in the future, because deep acting would just sometimes require that much more effort and skill. So despite emotional labor acting as essential professional skill in much of the mandated work out there, it's generally not officially taught to either humans or individuals of other species. How you act professionally as part of your specific line of work is often, at least within the assistance dog sector, implied and doesn't tend to be sort of directly formulated or taught extensively or formally enough. And this is in reference to both the humans and the guide dogs themselves. So it's generally treated as though it is something that workers, you simply embody it or you don't, kind of thing. There's this need to develop these skills solely through experience as a result, and sort of sidestepping many other considerations and this potential for a proactive education that could be offered to workers to support them through this. Particularly in the case of dogs, even more so for guide dogs, there is this strong, at times maybe, romanticized idea that dogs absolutely love the work they do and are naturally calm in all scenarios, and they're joyous in carrying out the tasks of their work. Especially if you think of that sort of the classic image of a Labrador guide dog, loyal and calm, man's best friend in inverted commas, all of that. But as many of you would know, I would assume on this call, each worker has their own personality and varied professional experiences prior to a job. We also need to consider the work culture, the atmosphere, dynamics with current employers and colleagues of all species, as well as simply their mood on a given day, to name just a few factors. All of this can directly and greatly impact their desire and even ability to perform emotional labor in a humane manner, or even at all sometimes. I am working on publishing some outcomes that address these matters and hopefully support the ability to perform deep acting within the individual context of a job, being recognized as a professional skill, and having it listed as a criteria for an individual of another species and employer to meet as part of an assessment and education process for guide dogs and GDMIs. To have that be a consideration from the beginning to the end of their work lives. So an overarching consideration here is a move away from what many practitioners will refer to as old school methods and approaches, meaning sort of these more outdated and traditional ways of educating guide dogs, which many guide dog schools are doing, of course, are in the process of doing, but also more old school ways of understanding and engaging with the emotional lives of guide dogs. So going that one step beyond recognizing that guide dogs have limited emotions and can manage them in some way, but extending it to acknowledging their full, rich, complicated emotional lives, that they can develop the skill to manage that as professionals. Even practical decisions around what equipment is being used. In the case of guide dogs, that would be harnesses and vests, of course, leashes and collars and things like that, as well as the tone of voice of the GDMI and client, and recognizing that even these factors can impact a guide dog's ability to perform emotional labor. So just as a quick example, has the guide dog worn this equipment before, and how are they accustomed to it? What material is it made of even, and how is it fitting the dog? Not only in terms of the physical fit, but in regard to the dog's level of body sensitivity. You know, is this equipment causing the dog to feel claustrophobic or controlled and shut down? Is it causing even pain in a worst case scenario that might be limiting their ability to manage their emotion displays in a humane, truly healthy manner? And so attention toward whether a particular guide dog will be able to utilize deep acting as a strategy to perform emotional labor will need to be considered really throughout the decision-making around their breed and breeding, the way they're being raised by puppy raisers, how assistance dog schools consider which GDMIs and clients they are matched with. So for example, if you have a very high energy guide dog matching them with a very low energy human might ask a lot of them in terms of managing their emotion displays. We also want to consider how they are educated and in what environments, as well as their later, sort of working success coming together with that vision impaired client during what's referred to as class, when GDMIs instruct the guide dog and the client together to form a team. That particular time frame is really rife for challenges around emotional labor on behalf of both the guide dogs and the GDMIs. But there are at times, however, when it is, hopefully just momentarily not possible or especially difficult to create an environment or create a situation that is ideal for a humane emotional labor practice. And so interlocutors in my own research really emphasize conflicts with clients acting as a prominent challenge to a guide dog's emotional labor practice, and that it requires a really high level of emotion management skill and support really from GDMIs. But even the most adaptable guide dog can become overwhelmed or might be experiencing lapses in their ability to perform emotional labor for a variety of reasons. And if these are then disregarded, the individual may fail to perform emotional labor in a humane manner and begin suppressing or faking emotion displays. And so therefore, I propose that an element of emotional labor that is humane is for GDMIs and others involved in their care to recognize when a guide dog's mask is cracking, which can be seen in behavior changes, health concerns, a sudden increase in mistakes during work, for example. And of course, the list goes on. This is one of the many reasons I propose that GDMIs begin being more explicitly and also theoretically taught to recognize even subtle or otherwise noteworthy signs suggesting a guide dog's lapse in emotional labor ability. Not just limiting their education to training the dogs, but into recognizing when this particular guide dog is unable to manage their emotion displays in a humane manner in a given moment. So I'll just do a very brief summary and start wrapping things up here. So an emotional labor practice that is humane would recognize humans and individuals of other species, in this case, guide dogs and GDMIs, as not only carrying out physical tasks as part of their job or naturally embodying the demeanor required, but as individuals performing varying levels of emotional labor to do so, and that this is, in fact, a professional skill. And we should really formulate and regulate criteria around a guide dog being selected and educated for their work only if they have the potential to utilize predominantly deep acting in this line of work. Whether an emotional labor performance is inhumane or humane is definitely never an absolute. It's more of a fluid state on this continuum that I showed earlier. And it's able to fluctuate from one moment to the next or slowly over time, depending on quite a complex tangle of factors, of course, definitely not limited to those I briefly mentioned here. Applying what I've spoken about within animal organization studies, guide dog education, and working success will require heightened awareness and sometimes the reconstruction of job structures and expectations, but also creating entirely new jobs where individuals who are interested in and suitable for the emotional labor a job requires can have their emotion displays align more genuinely with what is expected of them. So in the case of guide dogs, but I would also propose that this is applicable across assistance dogs and other working animals. This may mean finding another job for a particular canine or reevaluating how a particular school educates dogs. And I would also find it a very worthy undertaking for the job of a, I don't know, humane emotional labor consultant or something to be developed to guide those working with individuals of other species through those initial phases of adjustment. So my vision here really is for emotional labor that is humane, that they're educated, that guide dogs are educated for this, and that GDMIs are educated to perform deep acting, but that we also adjust our expectations and meet dogs and, of course, GDMIs where they are at on a given day, and to be able to offer them what they need to perform humane emotional labor. So hopefully this very little introduction to these concepts and terms can initiate further research to create meaningful, applicable impact for the shared work lives of human workers, but also their co-workers of other species. I would like to thank the anonymous interlocutors from Irish Guide Dogs for the Blind and others within the assistance dog sector who have made this research possible and were really so generous with both their time and insight they offered. I'd also like to, of course, thank Professor Samantha Hearn from the University of Exeter for supervising this research. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to come and join for this talk. It has been an absolute pleasure. Here are some of my contact details. I know this is quite a kind of niche topic, so it might be that you don't have a question or comment today, but I would really look forward to an email if you want to discuss it further at a later point. So yeah, please do reach out if you like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Warda, for that wonderful talk. At this time, we can open this up for question and answer. So if you feel more comfortable typing a question in the chat, I will moderate that and ask those questions. Otherwise, you can just use that hand raise button and I will call on people and we can get a wonderful conversation started. There are a lot of people here, so I have to flip between screens. Is there anybody who has a question right off the bat? Okay, I will start. This is a little bit less of the academic, but a bit more on the personal side. I'm wondering where in your work you came to realizing, in either your work with non-human animals or in your work academically, where you came to realize that this was an area that you really wanted to dig into? Like, was there a moment or was it an evolution over time?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think it was definitely an evolution over time and sort of bringing together those two worlds, sort of the lived experiences as a practitioner, as well as sort of wading through the literature that I was presented with during my master's. So a lot of work in animal organization studies. There are people looking at emotion management in that area, of course. And so I sort of started reading that and reflecting on it and realizing, oh, there is actually a term for this thing that I was grappling with as a practitioner. And oh, it's emotional labor. Okay, so what is that? And then thinking about it. And then as I started talking to interlocutors at Irish Guide Dogs for the Blind as well, it definitely kind of came to the fore how prominent this issue is really, that isn't being talked about very much within the sector. It's sort of like, you know, here's your education, go make the best of it. But there is so much more complication within that. So working with clients, working with guide dogs, what we're expecting guide dogs to really provide professionally. And so I think it really was that evolution over time, bringing that together. Sorry, I sort of watched that. I was reading comments at the same time, but yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I'm always interested when we do human animal studies to hear the stories of how people got involved, because it's never the top academic topic that most people are studying, right? So we have such interesting paths into these fields. We have two good questions in the chat. I'm going to start with Sharon's because I think it might take a little more time to unpack. Sharon's question is, I am wondering if this research can also be extended to the labor conditions of humans and other non-human species. If so, how do you conceptualize or theorize multi-species solidarities and how that connects with labor justice?
Sure. My big hope is really that it does extend, that people do take this on and apply it to their own research. I don't see it as something, like I mentioned in the talk, as being restricted to guide dogs or assistance dogs in any way. I definitely see it as something that is highly relevant for individuals of other species working out there. I mean, even if you think of like police forces and things, the amount of emotional labor that is required for their line of work is really extensive. And expects a lot of them. And so I definitely see this as being applicable to individuals of other species. And I think that you mentioned multi-species solidarity is definitely core to this. So we acknowledging this as a professional skill and being able to educate, in this case, guide dogs and GDMIs to perform emotional labor more humanely is definitely an act of solidarity towards, in this case, guide dogs. Yeah, definitely.
We also have a question from Tammy. The question is there any literature that applies these ideas to therapy work?
So when it comes to strategies, I haven't actually, like, when it comes to individuals of other species utilizing these strategies, I haven't read any literature on that yet with individuals of other species. So that's mainly human-centric literature. When it comes to just emotion management in general and literature on that topic, it definitely applies to therapy work. Predominantly, I see literature that is concerned with veterinarians. I see literature looking at animals in tourism as well. So there's a lot of literature out there with a wide scope, but I haven't seen anything looking at what I was talking about today in terms of strategies, specifically with animals working in therapy work. Yeah. I hope that answered that as well. Oh,
Thank
pet
you.
therapy, yeah.
Got a thumbs up from Tammy, so I think it did. Do we have any other questions in the audience? Yes, Linda.
Hi, thank you so much. What a
Hi.
wonderful presentation. Nice to see
Oh,
everybody.
thank you.
Nice to meet you, Tiamat. This was really, I love this. I have a quick question about your field research. And I was wondering, you mentioned you'd done it with the Irish guide dogs, and now living in Germany. So I was just curious, are you conducting research in Germany on guide dogs there now, or do you have some other field work in other international contexts that you're doing as a postdoc, or what's the situation like now in terms of bringing this research forward?
Oh, thank you for your question. Yeah. So all of this started with me working as a GDMI in Germany. So I did that for 6 years and I was taking a lot of notes, so like journal entries. The original draft of my thesis had way too much personal information in it for my journal entries, so I took all that out. But so really taking an autoethnographic approach with my experiences in Germany. So I had a ton of data from that, which was really helpful during the lockdown, which is when I was carrying out this field work. And then I was working together with Irish Guide Dogs for the Blind and essentially comparing and contrasting my experiences in Germany with theirs. So it was that sort of multi-sided approach. And I made it more about Irish guide dogs' experience with this than about my own. So I essentially looked at moments where interlocutors might mention something, and then I would bring in some text about that and some experiences about that from my own work as another comparison from a different area. And there was so much overlap that a lot of times it was as if they were telling my story or vice versa. It was a surprising amount of overlap. Of course, they're both sort of, Western Europe, and the dog training culture is quite similar in those areas. And at the moment, yeah, I mean, I just finished it, so I made myself some tea. I think about it. I'm working on developing this as a book. I'm working on developing quite a lot of the chapters as articles. So some of the stuff coming out of my research beyond strategies and what I spoke about today was actually how we even define emotional labor. It's been defined so far as just being something that's where the outcome is visually observable, with a real emphasis on vision. Whereas actually a lot of what came out of my research was looking at sound. So vision impaired clients hearing differences in the sounds the dogs make, and that suggesting that they're feeling stressed, or feeling the tension in the handle of the harness, and that suggesting that they're worried or stressed. And so I'm working on publishing those outcomes at the moment, and there's some other funding prospects I have in mind in terms of postdocs and fellowships and things. But yeah, I'll try not to continue rambling now.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to your book.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Could I ask a question, Carol?
Ken has a question.
Yeah, I don't know how to raise my hand otherwise. Yeah, so I'm really, it's a fascinating talk. We understand from the literature that dogs co-evolved. That is, that they participated in becoming companion animals. They shaped that. It wasn't just a social construction by us that pushed them into this. And we know that dogs are particularly sensitive to human emotions, and they look at our faces quite a bit and so forth, and even more so than primates, I think. So my question is, this incredible distinction that you've made between the surface display and the deep
acting, yeah.
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 Do you think that the dog is more or less unique in having that capability of not acting on a deep feeling, but faking it, as it were, being inauthentic for the moment? Is that a capability that they've acquired because of their peculiar evolutionary history, or do you think other species might have that as well?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think everyone here would agree that dogs definitely have an advantage in that area, but I do think I would extend it to other species. I mean, I did bring up police horses as kind of a classic example that most people would potentially be familiar with. If you think of police horses, they're prey animals. They've got a strong sort of flight response. So to ask a police horse to carry a human who might also be stressed through a city, stressful environment, through a stressful crowd that might be yelling and throwing things at them, and to then say, okay, now act professionally. So don't run through the crowd and kick people, don't lash out in any way. Essentially act professional, act the way we're expecting you to in this role. They're definitely needing to perform extensive emotional labor for that. I would think that a lot of times with horses, there might be a higher chance that they would be performing surface acting rather than deep acting. So there might just be that dissonance between what they're presenting. So they might be, like I kind of tried to explain during my talk, technically doing what we're asking by walking through a crowd, but just below the surface, there is still, they're not actually feeling calm about it. So they're doing what we're asking them to do, but it's really just on the surface. But again, in another situation where there's less stress, I do think that I would say that horses in this case would be able to perform deep acting because they would have had to have some sort of education. So a way of learning that, okay, you're in this situation, but it'll end up being okay because of, fill in the blank. So they've made that kind of connection over time and throughout their education through collecting experiences. That the ultimate outcome will be fine. And they've collected experiences, they've become an experienced police force. And so I think through the process of that, they would be utilizing deep acting, hopefully more than surface acting. Yeah, it's all about with deep acting, it's all about, do they have that ability for cognitive change? Do they have that ability to think one thought and then say, oh no, wait, let me redirect this towards something else to be able to control the outcome that I'll have, the sort of the outcome of my behavior in the future. So I do think that it's in many cases a matter of education. It's a matter of the human who's working with them to be able to support them through it as well in that moment. But definitely, like you say, I think dogs do have a strong benefit in that way.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Great.
There is a question in a chat that I think flows really nicely from that question, and it's from Elizabeth. Are guide dogs removed from service if they are just surface acting, even if they're still doing what they're supposed to do? And in your opinion, do you think they should be removed or retired from service if this is the case?
Yeah, I think that's another, these are all really great questions. Thank you, guys. I definitely, in my personal opinion, think that if a guide dog is needing to perform surface acting more than deep acting, so if they're needing to sort of fake their professionalism, suppress their true emotions more often than they're able to utilize deep acting, that this just isn't the right job for them, whether they're guide dogs or whether they're police horses or whichever animal we're talking about here. I definitely think that they should be retired from that particular job, but that doesn't mean that they're not able to carry out another line of work and be completely happy with it. There was a guide dog I educated who was really wonderful, but just didn't have the temperament for a guide dog. That was just essentially all it was. And they ended up working as a detection dog at the airport. So they were really like, they had a high energy, and the trainer just contacted me and said, we're looking for high energy dogs. Like, we're looking for the dogs who want to run around on top of suitcases and run after a ball after they found something successfully and have that drive. And so they were really happy in that line of work. And that is definitely something that's done from the assistance dog sector and the guide dog sector more specifically, that when a guide dog isn't, suited for that work, that they find, another one, like conservation canines is another example, as an alternative route for assistance dogs who aren't suitable in that way. I hope I addressed that, or understood that correctly. Yeah.
Yes, and we have a question from Ken Hopkins.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. I thought you were great today. Thanks. My question is in reference to animal welfare, and a lot of legislation refers to causing harm or causing suffering. And I was wondering if your thoughts on being able to recognize the social and emotional well-being of an animal. Is there some sort of threshold there that could be considered causing harm or causing suffering if it went ignored?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that's the level that we would need to take it to, really, to get that kind of change that I'm hoping to have. So one interesting line for future research that I kind of see is there's a number of tests that guide dogs go through at a lot of guide dog schools. So behavior checklist tests, and like everyone kind of has different names for them. Sometimes like infiltrating tests. They have usually one when they're a puppy, and then one when they're like going in for training, just to see how do they react to different stressful scenarios, different stressors. And I think there might be, in terms of just having like data and having sort of a more exact guideline in terms of, will this dog be able to perform predominantly deep acting, I think there might be a connection there that we could use. So we might be able to sort of catch it early and say, okay, they felt stressed by, I don't know, 5 of the 8 things. Like this is sort of a level that means that they might not be, from an animal welfare standpoint, we would be putting them under too much stress to work in this line of work. But again, like this research is really sort of the initial discussion starter. My hope is really to be able to carry out a lot more extensive research with more than with more than one guide dog school and really collect data on this. But I do think that it should be taken to that level, that it would be an animal welfare concern, because like I said, it can, you know, faking how you're feeling, suppressing your emotions, even with humans, can result in have an impact on your health. You can become sick from that. And I was speaking with Irish Guide Dogs for the Blind's veterinarian, but also other veterinarians on this topic, and they really did flag that up as something that can have a real physical impact on dogs if they're just under stress, feeling anxious, more often than not in their work. So yeah, my hope would be that I don't really I don't have the answers for it at the moment because I haven't conducted the research to have those answers, but that would really be my hope, that research is conducted in that area. Support that more, yeah.
We are close to the end of our time, but there's a lot going on in the chat that you haven't had an opportunity to see. So I'm probably going to miss something and maybe botch this a little bit, but I'm just going to give a quick summary of some of the topics in the chat. So if you have anything you'd like to comment on, Dr. Warda, of these, please do. But one thing coming up is Tammy pointed out 2 things, that this would be great to see applied to animal sheltering as well, and that there's probably also another comment was there's probably a lot of gender implications in this. Someone else who's simultaneously involved in animal assisted therapy, volunteer management, and academia finds this really helpful to conceptualize this tension as emotional labor rather than calling it stress. And there's also a comment about how the conditions and failings of labor in dogs is also similar to humans in a capitalist system where both species sort of have been trained to comply to whoever's in charge. So those are a lot of topics, and I don't know if you want to talk about any of those.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there was so much I wanted to talk about in this talk today, and I realized I was just talking really, really fast, and there's so much to say. So I took out a bunch of slides from my original thing. One of the things I wanted to address that I think might be relevant to Marvi's comment is feeling rules. It's pretty straightforward in terms of, if I explained it, everyone would think that it might make sense, but it isn't always acknowledged that way. They're essentially the expectations that we align with, and they're impacted by a whole number of things, including the capitalist system that you mentioned, but also how is the employer within that specific workplace formulating the expectations to the GDMI? How is the GDMI then educating the guide dog to align with those expectations? So there really is like so much here with like power dynamics, someone else, you know, gender. Yeah, sorry, I was looking at Tammy's gender implications, definitely. So yeah, oops. Oh, there's a picture. Okay. Yeah, there's so much to unpack with both of those things, and they're really, really relevant. And I sort of see that as part of the topic of feeling rules, which is that kind of that overarching umbrella that we all perform emotional labor underneath. Trying to look at the other one was about sort of shelter work. There's definitely literature as well, of course, on people working in shelters and emotion management. And again, these like gender implications. That is definitely relevant as well. And I mean, even in my research, talking to the folks at Irish Guide Dogs for the Blind, working in the kennels, and sort of the caretakers of the guide dogs out of working hours, and sort of their insight into the emotional lives of the guide dogs was really, really interesting. And they're all managing their emotions as well to take care of the dogs. So there is so much to consider. Of course, how well the staff working in the kennels manage their emotions will impact the dog's emotions, which impacts their ability to manage their emotions. So there's so much like in this discussion. I was very aware during my talk to not like trying to just dump everything on you all, but there really is quite a lot to unpack there. I'm not sure. Is there anything else, or should I wrap it up a bit?
If we have about 4 minutes, so sorry, I preemptively sent the post for the next colloquium. I didn't mean to send and confuse you. We have about 4 minutes, so we'll start wrapping up soon, but I do want to give a chance if you have anything else that you want to add.
I would definitely be really excited if anyone reached out to discuss how this might be relevant to their own research. I mean, my focus professionally has been guide dogs, but I really do see this in so many different contexts. Like I'm really excited about the growing field of animal organization studies. And so I think that within that sort of literature, there's so much that we could do. And I'm especially sort of interested in how developing this as a criteria for individuals of other species to meet and fulfill could support them so much. Like if we had this as a criteria when we're looking at a guide dog, or a potential guide dog rather, coming into their education, and we looked at how are they being bred, how are we preparing them sort of in their upbringing, how are we educating them through the lens of will they be able to genuinely be professional in this setting rather than just sort of like fake it till they make it. I think that could make a really huge difference for so many guide dogs and individuals of other species out there. So yeah, if anyone has any ideas and they'd want to reach out to me, or they just wanted to talk, I know, like I said in the talk, it's very niche, so people don't always know what to ask. But I don't want to reach out now in the comments. But if you do want to reach out after over email, that would really make my day. Yeah, I think that's all.
Thank you. Could you put your email back up in the chat in case anyone didn't get it down in the beginning? So I would like to thank everyone for coming to the talk today. In the chat, I put up a little preemptively, but I put up the flyer for our next talk and our last talk of, we sort of run on an academic semester system because we know a lot of you are on that system. So we take a break in the summer, but we do have a talk the first week of December called In the Innocent Bubble, How Non-Human Animal Companions Intersect with Childhood Innocence Within U.S. Mixed Species Families. And that one's going to be on December 8th at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So if you can make that, that would be great. If you can't make it and you're interested, just register and you'll get a videotape of the recording. I would like to thank everyone. I see people are dropping off. You have 12 o'clock meetings on the hour, I know. So we'll say goodbye to all of you now, but a really heartfelt thank you and congratulations to Dr. Tiamat Warda for this wonderful talk and the very, very important work that you are doing.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.